It started off like any other quiet morning at the lake cabin. Sunlight danced on the water, birds were chirping, and I had just logged into a virtual meeting with none other than the state attorney general. We were going over some critical updates, nothing anyone outside that call needed to hear. But just as things got serious, I heard the unmistakable creak of the front door opening, and I hadn't let anyone in. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake, maybe a neighbor, maybe a delivery. But then I heard footsteps, confident, nosy footsteps. I walked to the edge of the room, careful not to disturb the meeting. And there she was, our neighborhood's self-proclaimed enforcer, the infamous HOA. Karen, not knocking, not asking, just strolling in like she owned the place, holding a clipboard and snapping photos like she was on a mission. She didn't see the laptop on the table right away. She didn't realize I wasn't alone. And she certainly didn't know that the man on the screen was the highest-ranking legal official in the state. Her expression changed the moment she did. Eyes wide, hand flew to her mouth. But it was already too late. This wasn't just another overstep from an overzealous HOA officer. This was trespassing while I was in a live meeting with the Attorney General himself, and the look on his face. Let's just say he had questions. Big ones. What Karen didn't know is, this visit was going to cost her more than a stern warning. Stick around because what happened next turned into one of the most unexpected turns this HOA has ever faced, and trust me, you'll want to see how it all played out. Let me give you some context. This lake cabin has been in my family for decades. It's my peaceful escape from the noise and rules of everyday life, especially the petty drama stirred up by our HOA. Ever since Karen got voted onto the HOA board, she's been treating the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. Over the last few months, she's fined people for leaving garden tools out, warned folks about parking too crooked, and even measured someone's fence height with a tape measure she keeps in her purse. Yeah, she's that kind of neighbor. But even with all that, I never thought she'd actually enter someone's home uninvited. The excuse she gave later? She said she was doing a surprise inspection because she heard reports of unauthorized renovations. I hadn't changed a thing unless you count replacing a broken door hinge last weekend. Still, she barged in like she had a warrant, completely ignoring the fact that she was trespassing on private property, and the timing couldn't have been worse for her, at least. The Attorney General and I were in the middle of discussing a property rights issue involving local enforcement overreach. That's right, overreach. When Karen walked in, it was like the universe handed us a real-life example. I didn't even have to say anything. Atish just watched silently, brows raised as she stood frozen mid-step, her eyes darting between me and the screen. I could tell the wheels were turning in her head. She realized this wasn't just a neighbor she could push around. But she still didn't leave. She just stood there, clutching her clipboard tighter, like she was still trying to justify her actions. What she didn't know was, everything she did from that point forward was being witnessed by the one person who could actually hold her accountable. Karen finally spoke, her voice tight but trying to sound official. This cabin falls under HOA jurisdiction, and I have reason to believe there are unapproved modifications taking place. She glanced at the laptop again, but avoided eye contact. With the Attorney General on screen, her confidence was slipping, but not enough to back down. She was in too deep now. I just stared at her, letting the silence stretch while the AG observed the whole thing like it was a courtroom drama unfolding. In real time, you could almost hear the shift in the room. Karen had come in with her usual smug attitude, expecting to scare me with her authority. But now she was standing in front of the state's top legal official, and he wasn't amused. He hadn't said a word yet, but his expression said everything. I knew he was taking mental notes. What made it worse, or better, depending how you look at it, was that Karen wasn't acting alone. Turns out, a few other board members had raised concerns about how far she was taking things lately. One, even, emailed me a heads up a week prior, saying she'd been threatening to inspect properties without notice. I hadn't taken it seriously then, but now was all starting to connect. Behind Karen's pushy attitude was a deeper issue. She'd been on a quiet power trip ever since she was elected. Her sudden visits, aggressive fines, and constant surveillance weren't just annoying. They were stepping into dangerous legal territory. What she saw as keeping order, others were beginning to see as harassment. But Karen didn't see it that way. Not yet. She still believed she was in control. Still believed this cabin, my property, was hers to police. And that belief, that was about to cost her. Karen straightened up and tried to regain her usual tone of authority. You can't just do what you want out here. This cabin falls under HOA code. If you don't comply, we'll have to take further action. Her words were stiff, but her eyes kept flicking to the laptop, where the Attorney General was now leaning forward slightly. His hands folded, still silent. Still watching, I could tell she was trying to bluff her way through it. Hoping the man on the screen was just a friend, or maybe someone from a local zoning board she could talk over. She clearly hadn't recognized him. Not yet. And I wasn't about to help her. Let her dig the hole deeper. She started walking around, pointing at the beams, at the fireplace, even at a decorative canoe hanging on the wall. This all looks new. These additions weren't filed. You know that violates the HOA bylaws, Section 3.7. Her voice was getting louder now, like she was trying to talk over the tension in the room. Outside, the yacht bobbed quietly in the lake, the only calm part of the scene. Inside, it felt like the air was getting tighter. The ag finally spoke, calmly but firmly. Ma'am, could you please state your full name for the record? Karen blinked, startled. Excuse me. Who are you? She snapped. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned his attention to me. Are you currently experiencing any threat or obstruction of your private property rights? I nodded slowly. Karen took a step back. That's when it started to click. Her eyes widened as the reality began to settle in. But by then, it was too late. Her actions were already witnessed, her words recorded. And the highest legal voice in the state was taking notes. Karen stood frozen, her mouth slightly open as she struggled to process what was happening. The Attorney General didn't raise his voice, but his presence filled the room. You could see her confidence unraveling. But just when I thought this was the peak of the chaos, something even more unexpected happened. My door creaked open again. A second figure stepped inside. It was Frank, the HOA's vice president, someone who'd always kept a low profile. He looked just as surprised to see Karen as she was to see him. Karen, what the heck are you doing? He asked, clearly confused but also concerned. She stammered, trying to come up with an explanation. But the damage was already done. Frank's expression shifted as he noticed the laptop and the man on screen. Oh no, he muttered, recognizing the Attorney General instantly. Is this live? I nodded. Karen looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. Frank stepped forward, trying to smooth things over. Look, I had no idea she was planning this. We never authorized any cabin inspections. This isn't how the HOA operates. And that's when the real twist landed. He turned to Karen and said, You do realize the board voted last night to suspend all site visits until further review, right? I sent the email this morning. Karen didn't answer. Her face was pale. She hadn't seen the message, or maybe she had and chose to ignore it. Either way, she was acting completely outside her authority. Not only had she trespassed, she'd done it after an official vote against these very kinds of surprise visits. The Attorney General leaned in slightly. So now we have both a potential legal violation and a breach of internal policy. This just keeps getting more interesting. And it really, really did. Karen looked like she was about to speak, but nothing came out. The Attorney General calmly unmuted himself and said, "Well, I believe this incident warrants a deeper look, not just from a legal standpoint, but from a community leadership." 1. Karen tried to interject, but Frank cut her off. "You need to leave. Now, you've done enough." She hesitated, then turned and walked out, her shoes echoing across the wooden floor like punctuation marks on her downfall. Frank followed, shooting me an apologetic look. The cabin finally felt still again. I sat down, the adrenaline slowly wearing off, while the ag remained quiet for a moment. Then he looked at me with a slight smirk. "You weren't exaggerating when you said your HOA was getting out of hand?" Later that day, things moved fast. The HOA board held an emergency meeting, this time with legal oversight. Karen was officially suspended, pending investigation, and several homeowners came forward with similar stories of intimidation and overreach. Apparently, this wasn't her first time acting like a self-appointed sheriff. But this time, there were witnesses. There was proof. Just when I thought everything had finally calmed down, I received an email that evening. It wasn't from the HOA, it was from a journalist. Somehow, word had gotten out about the cabin incident, and now a local news outlet wanted to run a story on HOA overreach and property rights, using my case as a lead example. I looked out at the lake, still stunned at how a quiet day turned into something so explosive. The story wasn't just about Karen anymore. It had become something bigger, something that could actually change how HOAs operated across the state. And as wild as it all was, I had a feeling this wasn't over yet. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The news story aired, and to my surprise, it gained traction quickly. Emails started pouring in from people in other states, even from folks dealing with their own nightmare HOA situations. Some shared stories of similar overreach. Others just thanked me for standing up and documenting what happened. I never set out to be some kind of poster child for homeowner rights, but that's what it turned into. The HOA board made some serious changes. Karen was officially removed from her position after a full review. Turns out she'd been bending rules for a while, even pressuring vendors and contractors behind the scenes. Frank stepped in as interim president and promised full transparency moving forward. A new rule was introduced: no board member could enter a property without written consent from the homeowner and approval from the entire board. About time, as for me, I kept things simple. I repaired the old canoe rack she had flagged as unpermitted construction, just to be thorough. The cabin went back to being my peaceful escape, not a battleground. The Attorney General and I even joked about turning the whole event into a case study for future property law seminars. But what stuck with me most wasn't the drama. It was the reminder of how fast things can spiral when power goes unchecked. That day at the cabin taught me to trust my instincts, document everything, and stand your ground when someone crosses the line, especially when that line is your front door. So if you're dealing with an HOA that's getting a little too comfortable with control, remember your property, your rights. Don't let anyone, clipboard in hand or not, make you forget that. Thanks for watching. Stay smart, stay strong, and always keep your doors locked.